Hello and welcome to Off the Fence, a podcast where we deconstruct difficult decision-making to figure out what keeps us stuck and, more importantly, how do we get unstuck? I'm your host, Karen Covey, a former divorce lawyer, mediator, and arbitrator turned coach, author, and entrepreneur. With me today, I am so excited because I have a very special guest, Susan Guthrie. And Susan is nationally recognized as one of the top family law attorneys and mediators in the United States. She has been at the forefront of divorce practice for more than 30 years. After more than 20 years as a named partner in a leading law firm in Connecticut, she established her own boutique family law and mediation practice. And Susan has, in the past 2 years, transitioned into one of the leading family, collaborative, and mediation trainers in the world, and she regularly works with and consults with divorce professionals and attorneys in growing and marketing their practice for a happier and healthier life. Susan is also an internationally well-regarded expert in online mediation, and she's been featured in and on media outlets such as CNBC, MarketWatch, Forbes, Ion Chicago, and on and on and on and on. And Susan, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. This is very exciting. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I am excited beyond words. And what I'd like to focus on and just dive right into is your journey, right? You've been in the divorce world for a very long time. It sounds like pretty much as long as I have. And yet you've had many different roles in divorce, and you've done a lot of different things. Can you talk to our listeners a little bit about your journey through lawyer, mediator, trainer, etc.?
And first, I just want to say thank you for having me on, because this is a topic that I don't get to talk about very much. So I'm really excited and love that you dive into this with your listeners, because the reality of my journey is, for the first 26 years, I was stuck. I had made one decision, that was to become a lawyer. I made one other decision to become a divorce lawyer. It wasn't really a decision even. It's kind of what happened to me. And then for 26 years, I stayed in that place, although I wasn't very happy, and didn't decide to get out, didn't decide to make changes, didn't decide to find what lit me up and change me. And then in the last, 8 years or so, that's when the decisions got made, the changes started happening, and the new careers came fast and furious when I opened the door.
That's so interesting, because it sounds like, I mean, you went the path that most lawyers go, the path that we were all taught in law school. This is what you're supposed to want to do, right? You're supposed to go to, get your degree, get your license, go to a law firm, work there until you become partner, and then you die. Literally. Hopefully not too soon afterwards, but that's kind of the progression. And nobody really talks about what else is there available. So how did I know you were practicing law, you were very successful as a divorce attorney for a very long time. What made you change?
It was a variety of different things, but I will say probably the number one issue for me is that I just couldn't do what I was doing anymore. I really hit that wall. I had been coasting along, finding little tweaks that I could make to my practice that made it less, offensive to me or less difficult for me, but it did not change the fact that I was not a person that jumped out of bed in the morning and ran off to work and couldn't wait to get there. And so finally, some things happened, and I did exactly what you were just talking about, by the way. I joined a firm, I stayed there and became a partner. I then became a named partner. I then, took over the matrimonial division and, did all of those things. And by all outward appearances was a big success, but didn't really love what I was doing. Loved the people that I worked with, did not love that job. So when my two other senior partners decided to semi-retire, that suddenly opened the door for me to think about what I wanted, like what changes could I make right now as the firm was sort of separating ways. And it occurred to me that since I was already running the matrimonial department, I could just sort of pick it up, move it closer to my home for lifestyle reasons, and start practicing in a new way. It would be my firm, 100% what I wanted to do. And that's really the first decision that got me flowing. And I didn't even know all the additional decisions that were going to start coming, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I don't know, it's probably not a fair question, but I know so often we don't know what we don't know. And if you had known all the decisions and all the change and all the, upheaval that first decision was going to cause, I wonder if you would have made it. What do you think?
Great question. I think I absolutely would have, and I would have done it earlier, but I would have done it differently. I would have planned more. I would have gotten more help in finding out those decisions so that I could follow a much more practical path, because I made mistakes and it took me longer than it should have for me to get to where I wanted to be. And I didn't even really know where I wanted that to be, right? So yes, I would have, but I would have done it a better way.
What you're saying is so important. There's such gold in there. I just want to point out to people, it's like you didn't leave and start your own firm having all the answers. You didn't go from there to where you are now in one step. But until you took that first step, you can't take the next and the next and the next. And so many people, in whether it's in a divorce situation, in a career situation, so many lawyers are unhappy, but they don't want to leave until they've got it all figured out. And what I hear you saying is you didn't have it all figured out, but you did it anyway.
But I mean, it was a lot. That's a very good point. And I think you're right. A lot of the clients I work with these days are attorneys who are kind of in that same place I was, right? Not loving what they do, wanting to do something different. And they've been planning a change or thinking about a change for years. But until every duck is in a row, they're not willing to jump off that ledge or jump into the river or whatever a duck analogy works well there. And yes, I think if I had not made the change, and it was somewhat precipitated by events, right?
Right.
My partners were leaving. Unless I wanted to take over the entire space all by myself that we were in, I needed to find a new office, all of that. But yes, it definitely, having to take that first step, that's like a critical golden moment, because there are some decisions that you should make before you make that shift, and be thinking about where you want to go. But you're right, you can't have it all planned out, because until you do it, you don't really know how things are going to work out.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. And I've been on a different but similar journey in that my career has not been traditional by any sense of the word. And so, you can't, to think that you'll know it all is just craziness, but you have to take that first step. But just because you don't know everything doesn't mean that you don't make any plan at all. I mean, people always say jump and the net will appear. Well, that's great, but it might be helpful if you at least knew how to macrame or something before you jumped, right? So that just in case you weren't completely being foolish, there was some forethought going in. But jumping to your own firm was one thing, but you were a litigator, and you jumped from being a litigator to be a mediator. How did that happen?
That was really the crux of the change for me, and when my path started to get better, because I had the luxury at the time I established my own firm to put litigation behind me, but I had the financial ability to have the lawyers who worked for me still do litigation, so that I had that, you were talking about the net. I had a financial safety net as I transitioned from being a divorce litigator to mediator. So that was very helpful to me. And it's a model that some of my current clients actually follow as they're making that shift and as that plan. Sometimes it's very hard to shift 100% from one career to another career.
Absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense in the world, but you didn't stop at just shifting to mediator. You went from mediator to a mediator trainer. I don't know what the official title for that is, but you train other lawyers and mediators in how to be mediators, how to do online mediation, all the things. How did you decide to make that transition?
And this is where change started coming at me so quickly. As I started to make changes in my life, I started to see more and more opportunities opening themselves up to me. And that is the beauty of embracing change. It turned into a life of, instead of waking up, rinse, repeat, and doing the same thing every day, the same or relatively the same. The minute I started making changes, it's like a light bulb switched in my mind. And I could suddenly see all the other opportunities as they were opening in front of me. And as you successfully walk through some of those doors, it gives you more and more courage and excitement and interest in finding more open doors and walking through those. So it really became a natural progression for me. People liked what I was doing and said, hey, can you teach me how to do what you're doing? And I said, because I firmly believe in, sure, why couldn't I teach you how to do that? And you know what? You can. If you believe in yourself, you can do a lot of things you may have never done before.
But and maybe this is my bias being a lawyer, but that is such a different mindset than the one that most lawyers have. I mean, we are trained, people may or may not realize it, but we're trained to think of all the bad things that could happen and try to guard against the million negatives. Meanwhile, you never do a positive, right? How did you change your mindset?
That was the beauty of mediation for me, because the interim change for me was from litigator to mediator to omnivore entrepreneur, right? Mediation was in the middle. And part of successfully transitioning from a litigator to a mediator is changing your mindset from exactly what you're talking about, right? People pay us as lawyers to know all the answers, to tell people what to do, and to be all knowing. The one thing we know about lawyers is we hate not knowing the answer. And so part of successfully making that transition was having to step back from knowing everything and being comfortable with not knowing everything and trusting that the answers were out there. And for me, that mindset change to become a good mediator is what then helped me when someone came to me and said, Susan, the world just shut down during COVID, and I know you're an online mediator. Can you show me how to do that? And I said, sure, of course I can. And within, I think, 6 months, I'd trained 25,000 mediators on how to do online mediation.
Wow. How did you go from 0 to 25,000 in 6 months? That's impressive.
Yeah, well, COVID. I'm one of those.
COVID helped.
Yeah, COVID helped because it created the opportunity, right? It created a situation where our industry as mediators came to a grinding halt, and for lawyers as well. Yeah. Couldn't be in courtrooms, couldn't meet with clients in person. And so there were many, many, many thousands of practitioners who needed to find a different way. And I had already transitioned online and had been doing it successfully and loved it, honestly, loved what we all now know are the many benefits. And so because there was such demand in the beginning, it really gave me that opportunity but I needed to have my mind open to the way to do it because the people were there who wanted to learn. I had to figure out how to get what I knew across to all of them as quickly as possible because the demand was so great. So I immediately, or almost immediately, like literally day 4 or 5 of COVID shutdown, I started doing Zoom webinars for lawyers and mediators. And my Zoom license maxed out at 500. And for about the first 4 or 5 months, I was doing them once or twice a day, 4 or 5 days a week.
Wow.
It went very, very quickly.
Yeah, well, of course it did because everybody was shut down. I mean, lawyers are, let's just say, we're not early adopters most of the time, especially with technology, And so I think a lot of lawyers, they didn't know what to do. So the fact that you could see that opportunity and jump into the gap is beautiful and a testament to how the change in you had already started, how the mindset shift had happened. And what's so fascinating is that it was that mindset shift that started with the mediator, being a mediator, that got you ready for the next thing, just being open to possibility.
And that's exactly it. That was the magic for me, because if I hadn't had that, if I had been a litigator still, and that opportunity, even if I had been an online attorney, I don't think that I would have had that same ability to immediately turn around, adapt, figure out a delivery method for the training series and start doing it. I mean, it was hysterical. My husband was working because we were all at home in COVID. My husband was, answering phone calls and emails. My stepdaughter was doing my marketing and was my person. She's sending out tweets and things. But it all came together, and it came together in a remarkably short period of time. And that just led to more and more opportunity.
That's amazing. But how, you've gone through all these changes. How do you decide? I mean, some people will stew in a decision and stew and stew and stew. And it seems like you're fairly decisive. Like you see the opportunity and you're like, yeah, let's go. How do you do that?
Part of it is having done it now several times, and it has always turned out for the most part well. And please don't think there have not been missteps along the way. There have been certainly missteps. However, even with those missteps, I learned a great deal. New opportunities grew out of those missteps that I was then open and able to take the opportunity. And the more times that you step through that open door, the easier and more exciting and just the more belief you have in yourself. When someone says, "Can you do this?" My answer now is, unless it were like, "Can you run a marathon?" That might not be the same. But if somebody asks me if I can train on this, or if I can speak on that, or if I can do something, for the most part, it's like, sure, I can, because I I believe in myself.
And how did the belief just come from doing it little bit by little bit, making the decision, making the change, and seeing that you could not only survive it, but that you did really well with it?
I think it's a little of both. I think it's the experience of having done it and realizing that I had talents that I did not know that I had. But there's also an element of, I'm having the time of my life. I am living that if you love what you do, you will never work a day. Because everything that I'm doing is something new, because every time somebody brings something new, I say, yes, I'd love to try it, or I find a way to make it work or make it something that's interesting. And so, I'm really looking for those opportunities. Now it's not just the doors opening by chance out in front of me. It's my mind is creating the opportunities now as well.
That is, I really hope people hear that and take that to heart, because decision making and the ability to change, it's all a muscle. It's like the more you use it, the more it grows and the bigger it gets. And you've certainly used yours. In addition to all the things that we've talked about, you are also a podcaster, and you have two of your own podcasts. Can you tell me about those and why two?
Yeah. Well,
like one isn't enough?
Yeah. Well, they're very different, I will say. And actually, I love the podcast story because the podcasts grew out of one of those negative experiences, or one of those, I'll call less successful forays into something new. And it wasn't that I had started during a downtime. We had moved to California and I needed to take the bar exam. So I had some open time, and I decided with another person that I met to start a podcast, basically to fill some time, take some of those 20 plus years of knowledge out of our brains and share it. And the only thing that occurred to us to do it was that we liked listening to them. So why not try one? And this was, how hard can it be? So we started it, and honestly, it was quite successful, but the partnership was not. And so it turned into a little bit of a messy ending of that show. But what I found in that experience was an absolute love of getting people to share their stories, their wisdom, their expertise, and sharing mine as well. I feel like after 30 plus years in our fields doing what we do, you and I, we know a lot, and hopefully some of it can be helpful to other people. So when that podcast ended, I started Divorce and Beyond, which is my divorce podcast. And, one thing that we both know, again, having been in the industry for so long, is we know all the best people, all the experts, all the top folks to talk to. And because they're our friends, I've seen you have people who are on my show or on your show, they'll come on and they'll talk to our listeners. And so it gives us that opportunity to share. But as I transitioned from being a divorce professional and a mediator and a lawyer, and I now more work with professionals as opposed to doing day-to-day legal or mediative work, I wanted to share part of this journey that you and I are talking about, how to make pivots, how to make changes, how to successfully become that entrepreneur. And not in the sense of a business coach or something like that. I call myself a brainstormer. I work with colleagues to help them figure out what they want to do and who they can go to help them. Like I said at the top of the hour, I wouldn't do it without help anymore. So I started a second podcast, and that one is Make Money Mediating, because although we all define success differently, if we're not making money doing what we do, don't they say that's a hobby then? I mean, we need to make some money. So that's why two podcasts, totally different audiences, love them both equally.
That's so interesting. And, you're 100% right. I know divorce lawyers by and large get a bad rap, and some, quite frankly, deserve it. I'm putting that out there, but a lot don't. And, it's the fact that you can do what you love, and that you've turned this into doing what you love and looking at it and saying, okay, if you don't love what you're doing, I can help you. I can help you make that change, make that leap, make that jump. Because so many lawyers, I joke, with my husband, before I made the shift, and I became a mediator decades ago, right? So I knew the minute I set foot in a divorce courtroom that there had to be a better way. There just had
doesn't take long.
Yeah, this made no sense to me at all. But in any event, I used to, when I was trying to transition from the active practice of law into coaching, I used to joke that I was so far in the box, I didn't know there was a box.
Yeah.
It's just you get so stuck. So I hope that anyone listening hears what you're saying, because I've had a similar experience as well. I would never go back and do what I did before by myself. I made so many mistakes. And just having a mentor, a guide, a coach, someone to help you through has got to make such a big difference for your clients. Let's switch gears for a moment here, if we can. We've talked a lot about your journey and the podcasts. You also speak. So like the list just goes on and on. We could talk forever about all the things that you do, but how did you get into speaking?
That was really an offshoot of training, because training in a lot of ways is speaking. And so I would train different groups and on different topics. And then they would say, hey, that was great. Can you come do a training for our group? And then from that, it turned into, hey, would you be our keynote speaker? And from that, it grew, hey, I saw you at this industry event. Would you come to a totally different kind of event and be that our speaker there? So that kind of organically grew.
That's fascinating. And that's something that you still do today, right?
I do. And these days I speak at, you would not believe the different, places where they find something interesting in what I'm talking about, whether they're mediators, lawyers, or some completely different industry. I'm doing a human resources conference later this summer here in Chicago, because a lot of what I'm talking about doesn't have to be centered on family law, divorce, mediation, or being an attorney. It's being open to the possibilities, making changes, all the things that you and I are talking about.
Yeah, it sounds like, just listening to the whole conversation is more about change and how to be open to change and to make the decision to change. And that's fascinating. And I really hope that the listeners hear that it starts with one change, and the change can be small, and then it snowballs into more and more and more. And soon you have a whole different life, and a life that you really enjoy, it sounds like.
I tell my husband, and my husband really notices. I think that's the thing that's most remarkable out of this. We met about 20 years ago. He met a divorce litigator. That's who he met. That's who he started dating and eventually married. And he met a miserable divorce litigator. He knew I hated it. But he knew no more about how to tell me what else I could do in this world, since I had always done that, than I knew. And so it's really, a fun thing in our family, because now when somebody asks him what his wife does, or so, he said, oh God, do you have a couple of days, right? To tell you all the different things. But for him and for me, I'm excited. I'm excited to sit down at this computer each day. I'm excited to talk to you, to talk to clients, to talk to all the wonderful people that we get to meet when you open yourself up. And there's one thing that you said about change that I want to emphasize for people, because it's something that we can choose change, but sometimes change chooses us. And for me, a lot of the change that has happened in these last 8 years that I mentioned, where all these new wonderful things have come, were changes that I didn't necessarily want or welcome. And I had to also open myself up to accepting and looking for the positive in those changes, even when there were negatives. And, really accepting that change is going to, we say it to people as divorce attorneys and mediators, right? Change is going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's out of change, whether I initiated it or it was initiated in my world. The best things that have happened have come from accepting it and looking for the opportunity in it.
How do you do that? Because I know even in your podcast, Divorce and Beyond, your focus is looking for the positive in divorce. And that's a situation that most people don't see a lot of positive in, especially when they're going through it. The same thing is true. Look at COVID, right? There was not a lot of positive talking or thinking going on about COVID at the time that it was happening, right? So how do you find that positive piece of whatever change might be happening to you, as you put it?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And it took me a while. I want to be transparent with people. I went through about a year after one of the changes and was pretty miserable, and walked through that and lived in it and kind of wallowed in that misery a little bit. And I guess that was the process that I needed in that moment, until I woke up one day and realized I didn't really enjoy being miserable. I wasn't a person who was built for that. And I've really come to believe that we internally have the ability to turn things around for ourselves. And it starts with how we're thinking about things. And so while I was letting myself think this is the worst thing that ever happened, I hate this, I wish this weren't happening, I want this back, or I want that back, it wasn't until I turned around and said, oh, but there is this good thing. And wait a minute, there is that good thing. And this is kind of okay. And well, I don't like that anymore, or I still don't like that. What can I change about that? Right. So I started to look at finding the positives. I know it sounds Pollyanna, but it really does work, but also identifying what didn't work. And instead of just focusing on how much I didn't like it and it didn't work, what could I do to change it? And that's really where things started to shift for me. And it's not like I walk around all day with butterflies, tying bows in my hair and you know, whatever. I think that was some
No
Disney
unicorns?
movie. Yes, my unicorns. Well, I have my Ruth, my fairy godmother. But you know, I really do see that now. I actually, the more you work that muscle, the better you get at it. And now, whether it's a positive or a negative, I still think it's a positive, because if it's a negative, it makes you then look at how you can change that, or what can you pull from it.
And I think it sounds like what you're doing is controlling your focus, right? Because as all of the physicists and metaphysicists say, what you focus on expands, right? So if all you're focusing on, if you were focusing on the negative, you might not have seen the opportunities in the positive.
It's 100% that, right? It's so that really resonates. You should cut that out and put it on a wall somewhere, because that was a wonderful way to look at it. And I think that that's the magic of change as well, right? That's boiling it down to the kernel of change. And I always tell people on my show, awareness is the beginning of everything. Yep. Awareness of this is working for me, but this isn't. That's where you start. If you're just coasting along in your state of misery, or in your state of like, everything's great right now, nothing's ever going to change, I don't ever want it to. That's also a little unrealistic as well. And it's where you start realizing what's good, what's bad, what works, what doesn't. That's where I started to see the opportunities for positive change.
Yeah. And you make a good point, because people, we want things to stay the same when they're good and change when they're bad, right? We never think that change happens even when we're in a good place. But the truth is, that's the universe is energy, and it's always moving and it's always changing. And if it's good, enjoy it in the moment. And if it's bad, look for the positive and look for a different direction to go. It sounds like that's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's very much what I'm saying. And I honestly think that I not only have become happier in my career, but overall just a happier in my entire life, in my relationships, in my friendships, in all of those things. One of the reasons is because now I even value all of those more. My friendships, my relationships, my life when I'm not working, my life when I am working. And it probably boils down to being grateful for what you have. And I know gratitude is nothing new that your listeners have probably ever heard that we should practice. But I have also found one other thing I didn't want to lose sight of is someone, it's actually that old business partner, told me I had a mindset of not enough. What's the opposite of an abundance mindset? A scarcity mindset. she told me I had a scarcity mindset. And at first it took me aback, and I thought, really, I've never thought of myself that way. And I realized it was part of it was that focus on the negative all the time, and that there's not enough for everyone. And now that I really believe in this world, there's more than enough for everyone, and the universe provides, I feel like the universe has continued to provide even more and more. And again, that just goes back to that seeing the opportunities where they present themselves is something that you get that, third eye vision for.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've all had the experience of being so focused on a certain thing, getting a certain thing, that you exclude everything else, like nothing else exists in your vision. And so it's not that the possibilities aren't there, but it sounds like you've been able to expand your mind and open it up to so many possibilities that now you see things that are there for anyone to see, but other people might not notice.
And that's, that's a really lovely way to put it. And I think that's the value I bring to my clients in those sessions that I have with them. It's very interesting because we will do, a sort of a getting to know you. And I always just say, tell me your story. Tell me where you are. Tell me what's making you happy and unhappy. And usually by the end of that conversation, I've seen possibilities for them that seem so obvious when they're talking about them, but that they, as you just said, they can't see because what they're seeing is where they are. And so that's, I love how you phrased that as being able to see those opportunities for myself, but also being able to see them for other people.
Yeah, it sounds like you bring tremendous value to your clients, because that ability to see is really helpful for someone who is just stuck and can't see anything else. I mean, this podcast focuses so much on decision making, but I always tell people you can't make a decision if you don't know you have one. And so it sounds like you're starting that step before the decision and helping people know you have options. You have opportunities. You're just not seeing them. And once they open their mind to that, now you can talk about, okay, how do you decide to choose door A or door B or door C?
Right. Actually, you and I should talk, because I talk to people sort of a stage before you, and then they would go to you to help them open up the doors, of the doors that they choose. And that's, I'm not a coach. I know you've had specialized coaching training. I love coaches. It was really working with a coach in my business journey. I haven't mentioned this, but I worked with a coach along the way as I moved across the country and started doing different things. And it was really when I started working with a coach that, for so many reasons, things also took flight. And so that's when I said before, I wouldn't do it without somebody helping. A great coach is somebody that I think is almost a necessary, not a luxury, but a necessary.
100%. If you want to move in today's world, because things are changing so fast. I know I have my own business coach. I mean, I am a strong believer in coaches, makes a huge difference, but we are running out of time. I want to wrap up by asking you a totally unfair question. And I put it out there right in the beginning. But since this podcast is so much focused on decision making, I just was wondering, what do you think was the best decision you've ever made? Personal, business, doesn't matter.
I think the best decision I ever made, well, and people will say it's trite, but to marry my husband, to find and marry and enter into a partnership with someone who's a true partner to me, because none of all of what we are talking about would have been possible without his just very quiet, but very solid support behind me. He's got a wife who he can't even explain what I do, right? But he loves it. He loves that I'm happy. And so to be able to go through life with someone like that, how could you not say that was the best decision?
And it sounds like a wonderful decision and a great way to wrap this up. Susan, I have so enjoyed our conversation. We could talk for hours, I know, but where can people find you if they want to learn more? Where's the best place to find you?
I brought it all under one website. Finally, I had 3 or 4 websites with all these different crazy things I do, but it's all at susaneguthrie.com now. And that'll take you to the podcast, I have a free book people can download on the website. And it talks about all the different things that I do there.
That is wonderful. Susan, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. And for those of you who are out there listening or watching, if you like what you heard, if you want more of it, give this a thumbs up, like, subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the next episode.